The silence of the galaxy was shattered by the arrival of the Xerx fleet, an ancient, powerful species that had conquered countless worlds across the stars. They were ruthless, calculating, and believed they were beyond reproach. Their history was a tapestry of oppression, their empire stretching across light years, a dominion built on the suffering of countless civilizations. So when they set their eyes on Earth, it seemed like just another easy victory. For the Xerx, humanity was nothing more than a primitive species, fragile, easily intimidated, and ripe for subjugation. Their scouts had observed Earth for years, noting its violent history, its wars, and its fractured political systems. The aliens believed that Earth's people had no unity, no strength beyond their petty squabbles. And so, when they sent their invasion force to Earth's doorstep, they expected little resistance. They planned for the humans to bow, as countless species had before. But the Xerx had made a grave mistake. It wasn't the Earth's military forces, with their outdated weapons and limited technology, that caught the aliens off guard. It was one man, Sergeant Jack Hammer Malone, a Marine who had seen the darkest side of war, and who would become the galaxy's unwitting harbinger of humanity's wrath. The Xerx had landed in the middle of a desert in Nevada, where Earth's forces had prepared a weak line of defense. The aliens were confident. Their battle cruisers hovered over the battlefield like dark clouds, their energy cannons ready to reduce any opposition to dust. The humans on the ground, shivering in their ineffective armor, couldn't even fathom the technology that their enemies wielded. Earth's soldiers had no illusions, they had heard the horror stories of the Xerx, and they were scared. But Jack Malone wasn't afraid. He stood at the front of the line, his eyes narrowed as the alien ships dropped down, their hulking forms casting shadows over the sand. His team of Marines stood at attention behind him, all in various stages of disbelief. They had no idea what to expect, but they knew their orders: hold the line, at all costs. Don't just stand there, get moving. Jack barked, his voice like thunder across the desert. They're not going to wait for us to say please. The first Xerx dropship touched down, and the ground rumbled beneath their feet. A series of armored doors opened, and the alien warriors emerged, tall, imposing, and covered in battle armor that shimmered with an unnatural glow. Their weapons were massive, capable of disintegrating any human who dared to stand in their way. The humans raised their rifles, but deep down, they knew they were outmatched. This was a suicide mission. Just as the Xerx troops began to advance, the air was pierced by a voice from the front lines. Hold your fire. Jack shouted, stepping forward with his rifle lowered. He stood alone, defiantly facing the approaching alien force. This is our planet, and you've just made the biggest mistake of your lives. The Xerx general, towering over his soldiers, paused. The humans were still, unmoving, waiting for the inevitable. He raised a hand, signaling his forces to stop. He had expected fear, submission, but instead, he found defiance. His voice, deep and cold, crackled over the comms. Your resistance is futile, the Xerx general declared. Surrender now, and we may show mercy. Jack's lips curled into a sneer. Mercy, he repeated, his voice tinged with disgust. You want mercy from us? Let me explain something to you, alien. You're about to learn what war crimes are. You think we're harmless, don't you? That we're just some primitive species you can wipe out without consequence. You don't know a damn thing about humanity. The Xerx general tilted his head, clearly confused. He had never encountered a species that didn't cower in fear at the mention of their name. His cold eyes fixed on Jack, expecting him to back down, to understand his position. But instead, the human soldier's words only grew sharper. Let me tell you what happens when you invade a planet like Earth, Jack continued, his voice echoing across the desert. You'll find that we don't just fight, we fight dirty. We fight to win, no matter the cost. And when you start committing war crimes on our soil, things get ugly. You're not just facing an enemy on the battlefield, you're facing a people who know the true meaning of vengeance. The Xerx general raised an eyebrow, intrigued but still confident. We have faced countless species, he scoffed. None have resisted us for long. Your species will be no different. But Jack Malone was no ordinary soldier. With a cold, calculating look, he stepped back, signaling his Marines to open fire. They didn't hesitate. The first volley of gunfire hit the Xerx lines, but it wasn't enough. The aliens' armor deflected most of the rounds, but it wasn't the bullets that Jack was after, it was the message. You'll regret underestimating us, Jack muttered as the battle raged on, his rifle now aimed directly at the alien general. And so, the first real clash between humanity and the Xerx began, not just a fight for survival, but a battle to show the galaxy that Earth was not a place to be conquered, and humanity was not a species to be underestimated. The first few minutes of the battle were pure chaos. The Xerx soldiers, towering and clad in heavy, shimmering armor, opened fire with weapons that could melt through tanks. Their energy beams cut through the air with a shrill whine, disintegrating everything they touched. But the humans weren't retreating. They dug in, returning fire, though their rifles seemed insignificant against the might of the alien onslaught. Yet, there was something different in the way they fought. Something unexpected. Jack Malone, though outnumbered and outgunned, wasn't running, he wasn't even blinking. His mind worked at lightning speed, analyzing every movement, every shot, every strategic advantage. While the other Marines took cover behind the cracked desert rocks, Jack moved with deadly precision. He leaped from one position to the next, his body reacting faster than his mind could process, a soldier in his prime, trained to kill and survive at any cost. As the battle intensified, it became clear, this wasn't a fight for survival, it was a battle for humanity's soul. Don't just sit there. Jack shouted over the chaos, his voice commanding. Aim for their weak points. The joints, the necks, shoot for anything not covered in armor. His orders were sharp, cutting through the panic. The Marines, though still struggling to process the scale of the conflict, followed suit. The humans had learned quickly, adjusting their tactics on the fly. They weren't military geniuses or seasoned warriors like the Xerx, they were ordinary people, driven by a deep, primal urge to protect their home. And that was something the aliens could never anticipate. The Xerx general, still observing from behind his forces, began to grow agitated. His warriors were trained for planetary domination, not for this kind of resistance. These humans, in their frail bodies and crude weapons, were fighting with the ferocity of cornered animals, and they weren't breaking. Why aren't they retreating? The general hissed to his second-in-command. They are supposed to be weak. The Xerx officer was silent for a moment, watching the unfolding battle. They fight like they have nothing to lose, sir. And then, it clicked. Jack Malone wasn't just any Marine. He was a product of humanity's worst conflict, the wars that had shaped Earth's history. The fires of war had forged a species capable of both immense violence and remarkable resilience. Earth had faced its own extinction, but it had emerged stronger, smarter, more determined than ever. The Xerx, with their advanced technology, had failed to comprehend this truth. Jack smiled coldly as he watched his Marines outmaneuver the Xerx lines. Get ready for this, boys, he said to his team, his grin deadly. We're just getting started. Suddenly, a loud explosion rang out. A Xerx grenade had detonated, sending one of their own battle mechs spiraling into the air. For a brief moment, the aliens hesitated. Their arrogance was their downfall. They had expected to crush humanity with their superior strength and technology. What they hadn't prepared for was the human will to fight for its home, no matter the cost. Now, hit them where it hurts. Jack shouted. With that, the Marines launched their counteroffensive. Jack led the charge, running toward a group of Xerx soldiers who were regrouping behind a heavy armored vehicle. His hand gripped his assault rifle tightly as he took the lead, flanking them. His team followed suit, moving swiftly, decisively, as though they had trained together for years. The Xerx soldiers were caught off guard, unable to react quickly enough to the tactical genius of humanity's most desperate soldiers. Jack dove into the fray, his rifle blazing. He aimed for the exposed areas in the Xerx armor, taking down one alien soldier after another with brutal efficiency. The Xerx returned fire, but they were too slow, too unprepared for the human tactic of relentless guerrilla warfare. For the first time, the Xerx felt the taste of fear. These weren't just humans cowering in fear, these were soldiers who had fought wars they couldn't even comprehend, with methods that the Xerx had never seen before. As Jack and his team continued to tear through the Xerx forces, the aliens began to fall back, their plans of easy conquest crumbling before their eyes. The Marines weren't just holding their ground, they were winning. The fight had only just begun, but the balance of power was shifting. The Xerx had underestimated humanity's capacity to adapt and fight, and now they were paying the price. On the front lines, the Xerx general saw his troops begin to falter. His soldiers, though powerful and technologically superior, had never encountered a species willing to sacrifice everything to protect their home. They had no concept of human tenacity, the sheer will to fight back when everything seemed lost. Jack Malone stepped forward, his rifle smoking from the battle. The Xerx general stood across from him, his eyes narrowing in disbelief. "You will never win," the Xerx general growled, his voice tinged with a mix of anger and respect. Jack locked eyes with him. "We already have," he said, his tone cold and unwavering. "And you're just too arrogant to realize it." The general roared in frustration, ordering his remaining forces to regroup. But it was too late. The tide had turned. The Xerx general, his once proud soldiers retreating, snarled with fury. He had underestimated humanity's resolve, and now, the fight was no longer about victory, it was about survival. His forces, once confident in their technological superiority, were beginning to crack. The retreating aliens had no concept of the human spirit, the resilience that could drive a species to face annihilation and still fight with everything they had. But the Xerx were about to learn something much darker. Sergeant Jack Malone could see the cracks in the Xerx formation. Their retreat wasn't just disorganized, it was driven by fear. The once feared general was no longer calling the shots, the Xerx soldiers were now running for their lives. Jack could feel the adrenaline surging through his veins, but he knew the battle wasn't won yet. The tide had shifted, but the war was far from over. "Hold your ground," Jack barked to his team, even as they pushed forward. "Don't let them regroup. We've got them on the ropes. It's time to finish this." As the Marines advanced, they encountered something that stopped them dead in their tracks, something they hadn't anticipated. A massive, hulking Xerx war machine emerged from the depths of the alien retreat, its massive cannons charging, ready to unleash hell. The ground shook as it advanced, its towering figure casting an ominous shadow over the battlefield. The Xerx had brought in their trump card, a final attempt to crush humanity's resistance. Jack's heart pounded as he assessed the situation. This was no ordinary weapon. The Xerx war machine was a heavily armored titan, capable of laying waste to entire battalions with a single blast. If they didn't act quickly, it would obliterate everything they had fought for. "We need to disable it now," Jack shouted, his mind racing. He scanned the battlefield, searching for a weakness in the war machine's defenses. His team quickly fell into formation, all eyes on their leader. The Xerx had been relentless in their assault, but humanity had something the aliens didn't, ingenuity and the ability to think on their feet. "We're going to take it down, one step at a time," Jack said with a cold grin, his voice steady. "Follow my lead." Without hesitation, Jack and his team sprinted toward the advancing Xerx behemoth, using the natural cover of the desert terrain to shield their movements. They knew they had only one shot at this. The massive alien war machine turned its cannons toward them, and its deadly beams sliced through the air, vaporizing everything in their path. "Stay low," Jack yelled, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We've got to get close. Only then can we hit it where it hurts." As they neared the war machine, Jack led the charge. He knew they didn't have much time before the Xerx deployed reinforcements. The aliens were smarter than they looked, and they would figure out their plan soon enough. But Jack wasn't worried. He had been in far worse situations before. This was just another battle to win. The war machine fired again, narrowly missing Jack and his team. They were getting closer, their hearts pounding as the tension mounted. Jack's eyes never left the behemoth's glowing core, its energy reactor. It was their only chance. Now! Jack shouted, signaling his team to fire. The Marines unleashed a barrage of firepower, but the Xerx's armor held strong. The blast seemed to have little effect, bouncing off the war machine's thick outer plating. Jack's mind raced, he needed to find a way to expose the weak points of this technological monstrosity. And then it hit him. "Take out its joints," he shouted, his voice filled with urgency. "The legs. Aim for the joints." With laser precision, the Marines adjusted their fire, targeting the massive joints of the Xerx's war machine. The first shot struck true, a massive explosion erupting from the leg joint, causing the machine to stagger. For a moment, there was silence. And then, the war machine let out a high-pitched whine as it attempted to steady itself, but its movements were sluggish now. The Marines pressed their advantage. "One more shot," Jack yelled, rallying his team. "We've got them on the ropes." Another volley of fire slammed into the machine's weakened joints. The war machine's massive frame groaned as it collapsed to the ground, its cannons firing wildly into the air, before it finally ground to a halt, its core reactor imploding in a brilliant explosion. The Xerx soldiers watched in disbelief as their most powerful weapon was brought to its knees by the sheer will of humanity. A cheer erupted from the Marines, but Jack wasn't done yet. He had one final move to make, one last message to send to the Xerx: humanity would never be a conquered species. With the alien war machine burning in the background, Jack looked toward the retreating Xerx soldiers, who were now in full panic. His voice rang out across the battlefield, amplified by the speakers in his helmet. "This is our planet, you arrogant sons of bitches," Jack roared. "And you'll regret the day you ever set foot on Earth. We fight not just for survival, but for everything we've built. You'll never break us." The Xerx general, now a mere shadow of his former arrogance, watched helplessly as his forces crumbled. Humanity had shown the galaxy what it meant to stand tall in the face of extinction. And it wasn't over yet. The battlefield was a graveyard, littered with the wreckage of Xerx war machines, alien soldiers, and scorched earth. The sun had begun to set, casting a blood-red hue over the carnage. The Xerx had lost their most formidable weapon, their morale shattered, their forces scattered. The retreat was no longer a strategic withdrawal, it was a desperate scramble for survival. Jack Malone stood at the forefront of his team, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the last of the alien ships had begun to take off, fleeing the planet they had once believed would be their next conquest. His heart still raced from the adrenaline, but the victory felt hollow. There was more to be done. The battle might be won, but the war was far from over. "We've sent them a message," Jack muttered to himself. His voice was low, hoarse from the shouting, but it was filled with a quiet satisfaction. "But they'll be back. And next time, we won't be as lucky." The Marines gathered around him, their faces grim but resolute. They had fought a battle they had no right to win, and yet they had. Humanity had shown the galaxy what it meant to fight for its home, but there was still work to do. The Xerx fleet would regroup, and soon, reinforcements would arrive. They couldn't afford to celebrate just yet. "Good work, team," Jack said, turning to his fellow Marines. "You all held the line when it mattered. But we need to get moving. Earth isn't out of danger yet." In the distance, the remnants of Xerx forces were pulling back, but Jack knew that the alien fleet would be preparing a counteroffensive. The galaxy had underestimated humanity's capacity for war, but now, Earth had a target painted on its back. The battle for Earth had just begun, and the stakes were higher than ever. "All right, let's make sure we're prepared for the next wave," Jack ordered. "I don't need to tell you how much worse this could get. Stay sharp." The Marines didn't need any more encouragement. They had seen the alien fleet retreat, but they knew it wouldn't be long before the Xerx returned with everything they had. The real fight was just beginning. As the Marines regrouped, Jack turned his attention to the sky. The smoke from the battle still hung thick in the air, a reminder of the destruction that had been wrought. But in the distance, Jack saw something else, a glimmer of hope. The human resistance forces, scattered across the planet, were beginning to mobilize. The Earth had been attacked, but it had not been defeated. Back at the command center, the leaders of Earth's remaining military forces were already coordinating a response. They knew that the Xerx would never leave Earth alone now. They had made their mark, and the galaxy was watching. The message had been sent, loud and clear: humanity would never bow down. Earth was no longer a weak and fractured planet to be conquered, it was a powerful force to be reckoned with. But Jack knew that in order to win the coming war, humanity would need more than just military strength. It would need unity, resolve, and a willingness to make the ultimate sacrifices. The Xerx would test them like never before, but Jack had seen the spirit of humanity in the eyes of every Marine, every civilian, every person who had fought for their home. They were ready. "They thought they could take us down," Jack muttered as he gazed at the retreating alien fleet. "They thought wrong." The Marines gathered their weapons and prepared for the inevitable. Humanity was no longer just surviving. They were standing up, fighting back, and sending a message to every empire in the galaxy: Earth is not a place to be conquered. It is a place to be feared. The war was far from over. But Earth had made one thing clear: humans were not a species to be underestimated. And the Xerx would soon learn that lesson the hard way.